I love you. I love being on your show. And it's been a long time, much more than 29 albums.
Yes, no, I agree with that. So I got to ask you, because this is kind of what happened to me, is that I just listened to it. I didn't read anything. I just listened to it. And I thought to myself, this is like an autobiographical book on music. And, you know, I love to read autobiographies. It's my favorite thing to do, of musicians. And some people have interesting lives, some others are, you know, but one of the best books I ever read was yours, The Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. I mean, the way that you tell stories, the way that you do everything. And going off a little bit here, because when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about the cover of that book and how that reminded me of the Judith album.
Oh, yeah.
And how that reminded me of Send in the Clowns.
Yeah.
And Stephen Sondheim. And I just wanted to touch on this for a second, because we're just kind of going in this direction. How did you meet him, and how did that happen with Send in the Clowns? How did you get to do that? And did you ever spend any time with Stephen?
I did. I didn't at the beginning, because I met him about in 1978 at a fundraiser for the Equal Rights Amendment. And he was very complimentary. I had had the hit in 1975 and again in 1976. So that was good for him, good for business, I have to say. Why not be thankful and make nice, which he did. But I'll tell you how I found the song. I was in this apartment, 1973, same place, probably the same room, and I got a call from Leonard Cohen's oldest friend, Nancy Bacall, to whom he had introduced me in 1966. You know, the sign of a good friend is when they then invite you to meet their best friends. And that's what happened with Nancy. So Nancy called me. She was my friend now by that time for a long time. She lived up here on the Upper West Side, about 2 blocks from me. And she called me one day and she said, I'm sending you over a package and I want you to open it and go to the record and put the needle on this cut. Don't listen to anything else. Just put the needle on this cut and play it, and then call me back. So I actually didn't call her back. I listened. I said, like that. And then I called the name on the album, which was the cast recording of Little Night Music. And I got Hal Prince. That was the name that I knew on the cover. And he answered my call. You know, I was surprised. And he said, oh, no, I know who you are. You're the Both Sides Now girl. I said, okay. So I said, you've got a great song here on this show. I didn't know who Sondheim was. I didn't know what Little Night Music was. I had no clue. You know, I went to see the Marat Sade, and I went to see things in the Living Theater. I went to see Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, but I don't think I'd seen anything. I saw Hal Prince's first show in 1957, but never mind, I haven't seen anything. So I said, you have a great song. And Hal said, yeah, it's a good song, isn't it? And I said, yes. And he said, well, 200 people have already recorded it. This was 1973. The play went on in February of 73. This must have been June or July. So just a few months later, 200 people had already recorded Send in the Clowns. So I said to him, well, I don't care. I have to record the song. And then I said to him, who should I get to orchestrate it? And I had a lot of people in that area. I had played with orchestras. I knew what. And he said, I think you should call Jonathan Tooney. He does all of, at that point, had done and did in many years, all of Sondheim's orchestration. So I called Jonathan, and we were fast friends ever since. And that's what I recorded. He did a few of the other songs on the album. On Judas was the album. It came out in 75, and it went crazy. It went crazy in England. First of all, it was on the charts for a long time. I had had a run with Amazing Grace that was 70 weeks on the charts. And so, you know, it was a good place for me to start with Send in the Clowns. But I'll tell you a funny story, which nobody knows, which I think is interesting because you're interested in people's biographies and what happens to us along the way. I recorded this song and it was all ready to go in 75. And Joe Smith, who was then the president, I only found out this about 2 years ago. Jack Holzman told me this. Jack Holzman, president of Elektra during the years that I was with Elektra, the first 11 years, and also one of my closest friends. Today, he's still working. He's still working for WEA, Warner Elektra Atlantic. So somebody called Joe Smith on the eve of the release of both sides of Send in the Clowns, Judy Collins' release of Send in the Clowns. This is a story out of school because Jack did not tell me for decades. And he releases these little bits of information along the way. Like, for instance, he came to see me in 1959 at a club in Denver where I was singing and where I was opening for Bob Gibson, who discovered Joan Baez, by the way. And he called Jack and told Jack, I have found your Judy Collins, come out to Denver and hear her. And he did come out to Denver and he heard me, but he didn't say anything and he didn't introduce himself and he didn't stay. And about 50 years later, he told me that the reason was, I said, why didn't you say hello? He said, I heard you, I thought you were good, but he said, I didn't know if you had the steel to carry on with your career. And I said, well, you could have asked me. He said, I didn't know if you had determination. I said, you did not ask me. Of course I did. Anyway, on the eve of my release of Send in the Clowns by Elektra, there came a call on the phone to Joe Smith, who was then the president of Elektra, saying, Mr. Sinatra would prefer if Miss Collins would hold her release. Mr. Sinatra would like to go first. No. I love it. Don't you love it?
And it's interesting that you didn't find out about this because right. And I'm sure you probably have thought to yourself, what would I have done if I had known that back then?
Yeah, we are spared from knowledge of these things by cleverer, more intelligent minds around us. Well, I would have been lucky I didn't get a horse head in my bed. Anyway, I love it because there's stories that I have never told anyone that except intimate friends, but never for the radio. But you know what? It's part of my history.
Yes.
And then so what? I mean, it wouldn't have made a difference, I don't think, because, and I'll tell you why. When I called Jonathan Tunick and he orchestrated my version of Send in the Clowns, what he did was include da 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 da. Nobody else did that. I don't know why.
Yeah, it just kind of seems natural after hearing you do it that would have been something everybody else would have thought of. Isn't that funny? It's
funny, and that was the way it was in the show.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and that was Jonathan Tunick's original orchestration, but actually it goes to Sondheim. Sondheim is such a genius. The fact that he's gone from the planet in a way doesn't matter. He's a genius, he always will be. When I started to get to know him and spent time with him at his house, he sat down and played me all these songs. And when he did that, this was in 93, just about when I was starting to think about my album of Sondheim, which I then did in 2016. I think it was released in 2016. Love Letter to Stephen Sondheim. He played the songs, and every single note in all of his theatrical productions, every note is his. And it blew my mind because everything he played and sang them, of course, to me. He was a genius. So I tell you, I'm so lucky to have found that song. God bless Nancy. You know, she probably was the last person to see Leonard Cohen alive. she was his closest friend, and they lived together, not together, they lived close by in LA. He's another story altogether. Anyway,
Yes.
that's my clown story.
Right. And folks, anytime Judy and I get together on the radio, we always go off in different directions, but the conversations are always a lot of fun. So let's get back to the present, which has an echo of the past in it with this new record, Spellbound. Now, and I understand we just played Spellbound before. We heard Send in the Clowns, which is the title track of the new record. And I understand that you wrote that in Hawaii at the end of February of 2020. And that was right before the shit hit the fan, with the pandemic starting and that sort of thing. So, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that song because the whole record, as I mentioned before, is very visual. It's very visual. The storytelling is like you're right there in the middle of it. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that song. I had that on my list.
I was in Hawaii at the end of 2019. No, I was there at the end of February of 2020. So I went out for only 2 days, and I played at there's a rock and roll club that I played in a couple of days, and then I came home. And then I had 2 more shows in March, the 4th and the 5th I worked, and then we all went into lockdown everywhere. But I had, the song really is about my adventures in Hawaii before I got sober. And I started going to Hawaii probably in 64, 65.
Really?
And yeah. And I went back with Mimi. Mimi asked me after Dick Farina died, I said, I'd like you to go with me to Japan. And we went together, Arlo and Mimi Farina and the guy who played the guitar, who's the inspiration for Tambourine Man, Bruce Langhorne. The 4 of us went to Hawaii together. Went to Japan together. We had a great tour. And then we stopped over in Hawaii for my first time in 66. Sorry, I hadn't been there before. And so I knew Hawaii a little bit. And then I started going and did concerts there. But eventually I would go over when Jack Holzman had a place there, and he also had an airline called Ananda Air, an airline company. And he had a house on Maui. And I went over to spend some time with him. But all those years until I got sober, I was always drunk when I was in Hawaii. And it wasn't very pretty, None of our stories when drinking are very pretty. Maybe they have some highlights, like we met Pavarotti when we were drunk, but otherwise it's not so pretty.
Judy Collins is my guest today. The new album is called Spellbound, and it is the first record that Judy has ever done where she wrote all of the songs on it. You have been a great songwriter. When you write, you do great stuff. You are also, an incredible interpreter of other people's music, which you do a lot. That's the crux of Judy Collins. And now to come out after all these years and say, I'm going to write my own record for the first time. I know this has been on your list because you and I have talked about this forever. When I say, Judy, what's next? Well, at some point I want to get around to writing a record, and we've had that conversation for a couple of years.
Right.
And so you put out this great new record called Spellbound, which I mentioned before is sort of an autobiography on CD. And there's a song on here called Grand Canyon. Judy, you never told me that you had thought at one point in your life of becoming a park ranger, really?
Yeah, I did. I was living in Boulder, Colorado. I had spent the previous summer before I was married and before my son was born, running a lodge in Rocky Mountain National Park, a 9-mile hike into the wilderness, and just the most extraordinary experience where I cooked bread and pies on a wood stove. I served lunches. My husband and I served the lunches to the hikers coming out. This is a serious 11,000 feet incline hike. It's quite a hike. I don't know if I can do it today, but I could do it then with a 50-pound pack, actually. And when my husband was back in school, when we went back to school, we tried to buy this place, but we didn't weren't able to do it because the park put an effort in called Project 65 in order to get all commercial projects out of Rocky Mountain National Park, including this spellbinding, extraordinary place. And when we went back, we met when we were in Rocky Mountain National Park, we met a number of people who were in the Park Service, including the Longs Peak Ranger, John Clark, who really inspires. He was really the inspiration in some ways for my song, The Blizzard. He's the stranger in the coffee shop in the diner.
Ah.
It's not all real, but it sort of figures into the picture. Mm-hmm. By the way, he died last year, sadly. So we met a lot of people in the Park Service. And at one point, just about 1962, 61, before I went, it was 1960. And we went to Genesee Park, where the buffalo herd is.
Right.
And had a picnic and talked about our options. Number one, I had been invited to Chicago to sing at the Gate of Horn for 6 weeks in the summer of 60 with Bob Gibson and so forth. And the other invitation we had, because of our friendships and because of our experience in Rocky Mountain National Park, was we were invited to take over the fire watch at Twin Sisters, a pair of mountains nearby in Rocky Mountain National Park. I was in a cast from my hip to my toe. I had shattered my tibia and I had pins in my leg, and I was going to have this cast on for the next 6 months. It was a ski accident, of course. And so we went up there. I hobbled over there to the picnic table, and my son was about 1.5 years old and he was running around. And we said, we can't do Twin Peaks. What would happen if there was a fire and we had to get out and you have this thing on your leg and you can't even ride a horse with that on your leg? So I guess we better go to Chicago. And that's really how it happened.
That's funny. Judy Collins is our guest today on FM Odyssey. And another song I really liked on here, the song So Alive. Your experience of Greenwich Village in the early to mid 60s, you paint a picture of a guy in this song so vividly. Does he have a name?
Yeah, David Blue.
Okay, because I picked that up. I don't know how many other listeners would when they hear this song, which I'm going to play in a second. But I was like, now who is she talking about? So that whole time, that whole experience there, I know you and I have discussed that before, of meeting Dylan and Peter Yarrow, and that whole thing coming together for you was quite the experience. And I guess the two words that you picked to express what that was like for you, that period of time, so alive, right?
So alive, absolutely. We were so alive. And he did have a single bed.
Yes.
It's very hard sitting in a single bed and doing anything but trying to go to sleep. It was a magical time, and it was getting on the Greyhound bus to do your touring. Going off with your bag and your guitar, hoping that you'd get a gig somewhere, or maybe you had one already, but chances are you didn't have a place to stay when you got there. You didn't have a cell phone. You didn't have lunch. Touring in those days, touring nowadays is, well, it's what it is. I've always done it. It's in my DNA, so I can handle it. But the village was so magical. And then we'd wander down the street and go to Izzy Young's little store, the Folklore Center, and we'd find out where everybody was. We'd look he'd have things put up on the wall. So-and-so is in Denver, and so-and-so is in California, and Dylan's just gone to Tucson or whatever. And I'd walk down the street and I'd see Tom Paxton, with whom I worked the other day. He has this new group called the Beau Brummels. I think they're called the Beau Brummels. No, the Don Juans. I'm sorry.
The Beau Brummels were back then.
The Beau Brummels were then. The Don Juans are now, and he's still writing songs anyway. We would run into each other on the street in the village. I'd walk out my front door on West 10th and Hudson, and I'd walk down to the Kettle of Fish, and there he'd be, and he'd say, oh, listen, I just wrote this song, bottle of wine, fruit on the vine, when you gonna let me get sober? You want to record it? I say, sure.
That's funny. Speaking of Tom Paxton, let me see if this registers with you. The Names of Trees, the song.
Oh, God. Yeah. You know something? I just asked him to send me that song, and he did. And I have to find it because it was a couple of weeks ago. I saw it come over. So it's got to be on my email somewhere. It's a gorgeous song. I only heard it once.
Well, my friend Susan Graham White co-wrote that with him. I think I sent you that song from Susan, the piano that she wrote about her girlfriend's father wanted her to play the piano. And when he didn't, it's a very dramatic song. So I sent that to you over a year ago, but that's the same writer, Susan Graham White. Yeah.
Send it to me again. And I've got to I'm going to go on my phone and see if I can see Tom Paxton's name again, because he did send me. I asked him when I saw him, I said, I remember I asked you after we met up at a celebration for Pete Seeger at the Irish Center down here with Malachi Court. Mm-hmm. Not with Malachi, it was Malachi. Yeah. And I never got it. So he did send it, but I've been promoting my album.
Right. I hear you. Okay. So let's continue along. Judy Collins is my guest today on FM Odyssey. And Judy, I remember years ago, you told me the story about how you went to visit Leonard Cohen back in 1966. And you guys kind of opened the door for each other, because he had said to you, Judy, when are you going to stop doing other people's music and start writing your own? And your gift back to him was, but you can sing and you are a musician and you need to get out there and do that. And that's exactly what the both of you did. And so the first thing that you did is you wrote the song since you've asked. And Judy, I have to ask you now, with this new record where everything on it is your material, you wrote all of the songs on it. How has your writing evolved in your approach to writing now as to compared to when you wrote that song? What's changed?
It's a little different. It is. It had to. Everything evolves. He asked, the question was, it's very interesting. He said, I don't know why you're not writing your own songs. And Dylan always said to me, why don't you write your own songs? The questions are very different. And when Leonard asked me that, Leonard was a Talmudic scholar. He was a studier of the Talmud. He was his family was they were all, what do you call it? No, they were not reformed. They were the real item. Mm-hmm. And so he always was speaking in a way that was historic or somehow connected with history and the depths of the Greeks and the Jews and the Christians and so on. Nobody could write a song about Joan of Arc like he could. Nobody could take a Christian saint and do something different with them like he could. He was spectacular. So
and you're talking about Leonard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I sat down at my Steinway piano, which I played from the time, I'm a pianist, so that's what I do. And I began to noodle. And noodling led me to, since you've asked, it took me about 40 minutes to write it. That's how they hook you. Because after that, the next song I tried to write was Che, and that took me about 5 years. So that's how they get you in. Then I wrote Albatross, and then I wrote a song called Sky Fell, and then I wrote My Father. So those 4 songs came right away, and they came out as I sat down at the piano and noodled. And then what would come first, I don't even know, whether it was the lyric now, and through the years I would do that, but it's changed because now I did this in 2016, I wrote 365 poems. I would write a poem every day, just be free with it, like your morning writing, you just write it down and put it out and see what happens. And I would do that. And then I would print them out and look at them, and maybe they'd be a lyric. And it changed my writing. It changed my style, my approach. I do that a lot now. I don't write as many poems, but I have to start reading. I think the combination of reading other people's poetry and then writing your own every day is a very good primer.
Okay. Well, let's use an example. I don't know if I'm looking at the next song I'm going to ask you about. I don't know if this is such a good example of that, but it is. Hell on Wheels. Should this be a PSA about drinking and driving, this song, do you think?
Yeah. Somebody said to me recently, what's the most terrifying moment in your life? And that was it. I started to write that. I had begun before I met Ari Hest, I had always been tinkering, writing things. Some were half done, some were not. Notebook after notebook after notebook. Many of them full of starts, which didn't get completed. But in one of those books, I found this story. Of course, I remembered it vividly. I was in the park. I was working at one of the places in Grand Lake, Lemon Lodge, and I borrowed a car that summer. It was 1956. And I borrowed a car. I had a driver's license, a learner's license, I guess. I borrowed somebody's car in Grand Lake and drove to Fraser and visited my friend who was working in the Devil's Thumb ranch. And we had lunch together, we had beer together, we had some drinks together. And then I got in this borrowed car. It was a Chevy convertible, and tore out of there onto a dirt road, which was going to lead me back to the highway, back to Granby and Grand Lake. And I spun out on that dirt road and landed between the road and the ditch. And the fence hung over a ditch. And I looked out the window, and on the ground was a little blanket with two babies sitting on it. And they were right outside my window. I had almost killed these children.
Wow.
So I showed it to Ari. It was early on when we were writing together the songs for Silver Skies Blue. And I played him a couple things that I liked. I played him Secret Harbor, which I'd been fiddling with, and I played him Hell on Wheels. And I said, why don't you take this and fiddle around with it and see what you can come up with? And he did. A couple of lines that I used, he helped me to rewrite that whole and make it a song. So, yeah, it's a real, and the guy came out of the house screaming at me. And he said, and it's in the song, he said, I'm going to go in the house, I'm going to get a rope, I'm pulling you out, and then I'm calling the cops, because you almost killed my children. And I rocked that sucker back and forth until I got it out of the ditch and back onto the road, and I just sped off.
Wow.
I never, even after I got sober, I didn't try to find him to apologize, but I think apologizing wouldn't help. I mean, almost killed, it must have scared the shit out of him.
Right, sure.
He probably did not let his children play and sit on the highway anymore.
Judy Collins is my guest today. We're talking about her new album, Spellbound. There's a song on here, Judy, that you wrote called When I Was a Girl in Colorado. Just briefly, in terms of putting a song like that together, you have so much history of being in Colorado. Do you ever feel like when you're trying to write something like this, that there's just too much information? And how do I pare this down to fit all of these memories into a song?
Well, of course, I've written The Blizzard, and The Blizzard kind of says it all. This is a minimalist song about Colorado. It's minimalist, and it's one of those songs that now people have picked up on. Audiences just go crazy. When I play it, there's this silence, and then people go nuts. That doesn't always happen. It happens with Send in the Clowns, happens with Amazing Grace. Sometimes it happens with Both Sides Now, but it's not the same kind of silence. This is different. It's the same thing that happens when I sing The Blizzard. And people are waiting to find out the end of the story, which is what you want. A storyteller wants to have people sort of sitting on the edge of their seats, waiting. How's this going to end?
Right. Sure. Yes. And in the case of the Blizzard, it ends with that really long piano note that we've discussed many times, like at the end of A Day in the Life, right? From the Beatles, which is like perfect. So
Exactly. Exactly. Don't turn off the recording machine.
we're not done yet. we gotta let this part go. So okay. Gilded Dreams is another song on here that I really, really liked a lot. And I kind of thought to myself, now, who is she describing in this song? It sounds like Leonard Cohen, but that's just what I thought, and, if you want to keep that disclosed, that's fine. But I felt like there was a figure in this song that you were, like you've done in other songs where, it may not be, do you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, right? Or no?
Yes, I do.
she's just looking at me.
But as much as I talk about everything, I'm not going to talk about what's it called?
Gilded Dream.
Gilded Rooms.
Gilded Rooms.
I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to leave it as the mysterious.
Something else that I never knew about you until I listened to this record. Like I said, it's like an autobiographical record. Prairie Dream. I never knew that your dad was born on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation. I know he's not a Nez Perce native, but I never knew that he was born there. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but when I saw this, I thought, how interesting is this? Because about a year or two ago, I spent a whole hour or two with Danny O'Keefe, and we were talking about.
Oh, yes. He Looking Glass, what's it called?
Looking Glass and the Dreamers.
Looking Glass and the Dreamers, yeah.
Yes. And
it's very synchronistic, yeah.
Yeah. And when I saw this, I was like, wow, isn't that interesting? So tell me a little bit about this song and about, how you stumbled upon this as a memory, as a thought that you wanted to put into words and create a story about.
Well, my dad, of course, was not an American Indian. He was Irish Scottish, but he was he was born on the Nez Perce reservation. And his favorite person in the world was Chief Joseph. And he talked about Chief Joseph a lot. And he read us the Chief Joseph speech. But all my life, I have been, I'm very angry at the government for a lot of things for centuries. The manifest destiny that's part of our history is so disgraceful. And it started out with the murdering of the buffalo in order to kill off the Indians. I mean, if you take the resource of life and food and shelter, and I mean, they wore the buffalo robes, they ate the insides of the buffalo, they chased the buffalo. And so this effort to simply remove this species from the planet. I mean, as I said, there's this little herd in Genesee Park in Colorado of buffalo. I think there are a couple of herds around the planet, around the country. And so I've just been hot under the collar about American Indians for a long time. And I don't know where it came out of, the thunder of the hooves of Indian ponies. That was the first line. And that image and that feeling just propelled the song. Now, also the chorus, sunrise, sundown, sundown, sunrise. In 2016, I ran across the 100th anniversary of Jackson's Sundowns winning. Was it the anniversary of the win? I think so. He was an American, he was a Nez Perce Indian who was a rodeo rider, and he won the International Rodeo Prize at 53, at the age of 53.
Remember that.
And the what's the name of the company? What are those rugs called? Those Indian rugs that are made in that town in Oregon. They made a rug. I have it on my couch there in the living room. It's a big rug of him on the horse. And it's funny because there was the reason that he was back in the rodeo at 53, he had quit riding, and he was a big hero in Idaho and Oregon. And he won all the first prizes, but he retired a couple of years before. And then the sculptor decided to start following him around and making a sculpture of him, and said, "You have to ride. We've got to go back to that big rodeo that you won so many times, and you got to ride again." And he said, "I can't. I mean, I'm too old. I can't." And he said, "No, I'll pay your fee. You know, you won't get injured. You'll be okay because you're such a great rider." And so he did ride again. And this sculpture made a sculpture of him, which is in the park in Denver, which I grew up with. I didn't even realize it. Anyway, I used the name Sundown. I wondered if Jackson Brown is named after him. I don't know. I've never asked him. Well, but I got pardon?
I said that will be a good question to ask him.
Yeah, I don't know. But I got so involved with Jackson Sundown that the whole Indian experience, and the Nez Perce and the Cherokees also having read Blood and Thunder about the Apaches, and then the big book about Prairie Moon, I think it's called, about the Cheyenne tribes. There's been a lot of that kind of presence of the writing of the history of these quite extraordinary American Indian tribes, many of whom were slaughtered and driven out of their homes and wound up, hard to say where or when. So that's where it was. I mean, it was a passion born out of my own knowledge of that history. And yeah.
Okay. All right. I got two other questions for you, two other songs, and then I'll let you get on to the next thing that you need to do. Judy, one of the songs that I could really relate to on this new record, Spellbound, is the song City of Awakening. Obviously, pandemic is all written all over this. And I thought it was interesting that you had mentioned in the liner notes that getting to know Central Park life like never before, and the quietness that you experienced when you were walking along the Hudson because of the lack of people and traffic. And it's funny because you know how I love to walk at my beach, my church every day.
Oh, yes, I love it.
And when this whole thing happened during the pandemic and they were not allowing people to go over there, it was the most rewarding time of my life to be there. You know, just with the wildlife and, you know, the blackbirds and the whitebirds, they all like coexist together. They don't care what color they are. And the ocean feeds them 3 meals a day and everybody's in harmony. And it was so beautiful without all those people around. And I totally related to what you were getting at in this song about what that felt for you, to be able to walk around where you live and feel the silence and begin to embrace the beauty that is sometimes so buried because there's just too much going on that you can't get to it, you know? Tell me about this song.
This was New York. You know, there were a lot of shuttered shops, a lot of boarded up places. The silence in the city was quite amazing. And I think the sense of the desertion in the city of everybody went to their houses in the country. And those of us who stayed here had to be courageous and determined and to embrace the nature that's here so that we could get through this. And then setting up things that made us human and had us in contact with other people. I started doing a lot of, usually in the city, we have dinner with friends, you know, 3 or 4 times a week. So we started doing Zooms with friends in that same way. So we stayed in touch with people. I mean, that's part of life and part of the interaction that one needs. You know, I really sympathize in this problematic time with young children who need to have that socialization and aren't getting it in quite the way that they might otherwise. But there are, you know, there are compensations and so on. But I wanted to write about New York as an entity, as a place where people are used to coming together and where great things happen and where dreams happen, and where when I came here, you know, city of poverty, city of wealth, city of inspiration, the city where so much happens, and suddenly nothing was happening, apparently. Although on the inside, there was a lot going on. And I think we all needed a rest, and certainly the planet needed a rest. So I just wanted to point out that New York City is an entity. It's a place that can survive.
Right. Okay. Last song I wanted to ask you about. Judy Collins has been my guest today on FM Odyssey. The new album is called Spellbound, and the song Arizona, it was written about a chapter in your life back in 1962, which was a challenging time for you, which I don't know if a lot of listeners know about what you were going through back in that particular year. Can you briefly tell us a little bit about that?
It was a bad, dark year. It was also very good in a lot of ways, but things happened that were difficult. My marriage was on the rocks, and I had been having an affair, and I made the mistake of telling my husband this. And of course, that was the end of everything. And then I sang at Carnegie Hall. I opened for Theodore Bikel. And the next day, which was exciting. And then, as happens in life, the contrast was I had to get on a plane and go to Tucson the next day. I have a date coming up in Tucson, by the way, in a little while. It's interesting. And I had to sing at a little club called Ash Alley. I'm sure it's gone by now. And the people who ran the club, and I was having health problems. I would take a deep breath and my lungs would gurgle. And I didn't want to go see a doctor. So I went out to Tucson. These two kids that were running this club, they were kids. They were probably a year older than I. They were interns at the Tucson clinic. And the doctor they worked for was a lung specialist. So they said to me, tomorrow morning, we're taking you to the Tucson clinic to see Dr. Schneider. And on the way, I made them stop, and we bought for me a case of Canadian beer and a quart of Kahlua. And then I checked into the hospital, and Dr. Schneider looked me over and said, "You're not going anywhere. You have tuberculosis." So it was, fortunately, I didn't have to go to Switzerland for a year, which is what previously one would have to do if you had tuberculosis. But to my good luck, good fortune, now they developed the drugs to cure and get you through tuberculosis. I don't know what they were using. I can't remember. Anyway, I was in the hospital there, and I had this quarantine. I was quarantined at the bottom of this hospital, which was an adobe, beautiful American Indian sort of structure. And there was a room where nobody else could get to me, this huge room on the ground floor with all of these screens looking right out on the desert, which was gorgeous. I'm a Colorado girl, but I hadn't ever spent any time in the desert of that sort. And I was alone. Nobody could get at me. I could write in my journals. I could practice the guitar. And part of it was in Tucson, and the rest was in Denver at the National Jewish Hospital.
How long were you in that space with that?
I was there about a month and a half. And then in Colorado, I was there for another 4 months.
Wow.
It was about a 6-month situation.
Wow.
And I wrote that song and started performing it in 2016. And people wanted to know where they could get it. And I said, well, eventually I'll get it recorded, but it's not around yet.
You know, I always ask you this at the end of our conversations. And I keep thinking that at some point you're going to say, I've run out of things to do next. but that's never the case. So I'm going to ask you again, what's next for you?
I'm trying to write another book. And one of the focus is short views, memories, and then song lyrics, and then new poems. It's sort of a 3-part selection. Each one is a chapter in a sense, but it might just be looked at as a small widget in the puzzle. So I'm trying to write that. I'm back again. You have to keep prime the pump. So I'm back to writing poems and trying to see whether there are songs or not. I've got a few things cooking that look like they might survive.
So when you had this idle time, obviously, like a whole bunch of musicians had during the pandemic, where you're used to being out and you're used to being interacting with audiences. Did that affect you? Like, did you kind of feel depressed after a while from not having that connection? And how does it feel? Like, I know I heard that you're going to be doing a show with Judy Collins Young, I guess, in another month or two. I don't remember where it was, somewhere up I guess in Pennsylvania, somewhere. But how do you feel now as after being off and not performing for so long? How does it feel now to be back performing again? Is it something as exciting as it was before it started, or?
Oh yeah, it's fabulous to be out. But it was also fabulous not to be out. I mean, I practiced every day. I went to the piano. I did some writing. You know, I talked with friends. I took walks. I cooked. I made meals. I didn't cook a lot, but a lot of. No, I needed the rest desperately. You know, I normally do about 120 shows a year. I couldn't get any time off. And when the pandemic hit, I had 14 months. During those 14 months, I did 2 virtual shows, one at Town Hall and one in someplace on the water at the Chrysler Theater. So, but I was thrilled to be off the road. And I'm thrilled to be back in the road. I started back working in May here in New York at the winery. And I've been going ever since. So, and I've got I go off on Thursday for 5 weeks. And each has its own possibilities and qualities, I will say.
Judy, thank you so much. It's always great to spend time with you and share stories. And I just absolutely adore you and your music for all the years that you've done this. And you just keep coming out with this great stuff, which is not easy to say about a lot of your other contemporaries. And I'm glad that you're still at it and still doing it and still sharing with us. That's very meaningful.
I love you. You're wonderful. And the service you do to everyone with the artists that come on your show and all of the songs that you expose and all of the stories that you expose is a huge treasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And it was great to see you again.
Yeah, it's really a treat. Have a great day.
You too.
Enjoy the ocean.
I will. Okay, that was fun. It was good to.
Was great.
Good to hang with you. I know you got something else going on after this, so I'll let you go. So
okay, John. I'll see you soon. I'll see you in person soon.
Yeah, maybe if you get down to Florida when I'm in New York again, we can, go if you're doing shows or something. That'd be great. I will look forward to seeing you. Good. Okay. All right. Take care of yourself. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.